I heard a sharp, hollow thump behind me, on my son's wedding day. When I turned around, I saw my wife standing there, frozen, trembling, a trash bin pulled tight over her head. The stench of chemicals was so strong she could barely breathe. The person who did it was my daughter-in-law. What stopped my heart wasn't the act itself. It was the moment my son walked in. He looked at his mother like that, then turned to us and told us to leave. If you're listening to this story right now, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. It helps me know that somewhere out there are still people willing to hear the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And now let's go back to that moment. Because that trash bin falling down was not the beginning of the tragedy. It was only when everything was finally exposed. I stood still for a few seconds, not out of fear, but because my mind needed time to understand what had just happened. In my life, I've seen buildings collapse, deals fall apart, people turn their backs over money. But I never imagined I would see my wife standing in the middle of a luxurious bridal lounge at the plaza, with a trash bin pulled over her head, on the eve of our son's wedding. Rose didn't scream. That was what hurt the most. She just trembled, very slightly, as if she were trying to keep her balance. Her arms hung loose. Her fingers curled inward. The scent was too strong, pressing down on her chest. I knew that look. For more than 10 years, I had learned every small sign of how her body reacted to chemicals. But here, in a room soaked with perfume, hairspray, and makeup powder, no one cared. It had all started just 15 minutes earlier. Blair said the staff was too busy. She asked Rose to help carry a tray of champagne into the lounge for her close friends. Her voice was soft. She even smiled. Rose turned to look at me, unsure. I shook my head very slightly, but she still nodded. That was Rose. She believed that if she was kind enough, things would be fine. The moment the lounge door opened, the scent hit like an invisible wall. Even standing outside, I felt uncomfortable. Rose slowed immediately. Inside, Blair sat in front of the mirror. Expensive bottles and jars were spread everywhere. She didn't turn around. She just spoke calmly, telling Rose to set the tray on the table. Rose's hands were shaking. I saw it clearly. One drop of champagne spilled, then another. Finally, a glass tipped over, and the liquid poured onto Blair's white shoes. The room went silent, just for a brief moment. Then Blair stood up. She didn't shout. She didn't yell. She exhaled slowly, as if she had been deeply insulted. She looked at the shoes, then at Rose. From head to toe, that look wasn't anger. It was cold, calculated. "Do you know how much these shoes cost?" Blair said. Her voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. Rose stammered an apology. I stepped forward, but before I could say anything, Blair turned and reached toward the corner of the room. There was a trash bin there, filled with used cotton pads, tissues, empty makeup containers. Blair lifted it quickly, as if she had already decided. A dull thump, not loud, but dry. Final. Everyone froze. Some girls turned away. Others covered their mouths. No one stepped in. I rushed forward and pulled the bin off Rose's head. The scent clung to her. She gasped for air. Short, shallow breaths. I held her shoulders. I whispered her name. Blair stood there with her arms crossed, like she had just finished an annoying chore. That was when Sterling walked in. My son scanned the room. His eyes passed over the trash bin on the floor, over his mother's pale face, then stopped on Blair. I waited. I thought, just one sentence, one gesture, anything. But Sterling didn't look at me for long. He moved quickly to Blair and asked if her shoes were okay. Blair leaned into him and whispered something. Sterling turned to me. His expression had changed. Not confusion, annoyance. "Why are you two here?" he asked. Before I could answer, he stepped closer. His voice dropped sharp and cold. He said today was important, that we had ruined everything, that we had embarrassed Blair in front of her friends. I raised my hand. Not to argue, but to stop him as he moved closer to Rose. That was when everything broke. Sterling pushed my hand away. Not hard, but hard enough for the message to be clear. "You're an embarrassment to me," he said. "Leave before her family sees you." I looked at my son for a long time. I said nothing. In that moment, I understood something terrifyingly clear. He was protecting his position, not his humanity. He feared losing face more than losing his parents. I placed my hand on Rose's back and guided her out of the room. No one stopped us. The door closed behind us. Wedding music echoed faintly in the distance. I heard my footsteps clearly in the long hotel hallway. Each step carried a question I never thought I would ask in my life. What kind of son had I raised that he could turn away so easily? And that was only the beginning. We left the bridal area in silence. Rose walked slowly. Every breath took effort. I didn't ask if she was okay. I already knew the answer. For Rose, the physical discomfort was only a small part of it. What hurt her more was the look in our son's eyes just moments before. When the elevator doors closed, Rose leaned lightly against my arm. She didn't cry. Rose rarely cries. She only said very softly, as if afraid of tiring me even more, "I'm sorry. I didn't want to ruin our son's day." That sentence kept me silent for a long time. I thought about all the times she had apologized on behalf of others, and I understood then what had just happened was not a sudden outburst. It was the result of many long days I had failed to see. Sterling had always believed his parents lived only on a modest pension. He thought I retired early because I was worn out, that I had left the business world long ago. I never corrected him. I wanted to see how my son would live without the shadow of money protecting him. This wedding to him was a social step forward. To me, it was a test. Every expense, the ballroom, the flowers, even the table linens at the plaza, was paid through a company under a different name. No one in the bride's family knew. Blair, least of all. I wanted to see who she truly was when she believed she was marrying into a family that was just getting by. Rose knew all of this, and she chose silence. For months before the wedding, Blair often called Rose to the villa that I had put in Sterling's name, not to talk about family matters, but to ask for a little help, cleaning the living room before a party, organizing the storage room after shopping, preparing breakfast when Blair felt tired. According to Blair, these were ways for Rose to get used to her role as a mother-in-law. Rose never told me. I only understood why much later. She was afraid I would be disappointed in our son, afraid I would start looking at Sterling differently. Once Rose came home with the scent of perfume clinging to her clothes for hours. She told me Blair liked trying new fragrances and didn't pay much attention. I suggested speaking directly to Blair about Rose's condition. Rose shook her head. She believed Blair would eventually understand, but Blair understood perfectly. She knew Rose was sensitive to scents. She knew every symptom, every reaction, and that was exactly why she chose the strongest perfume, the kind advertised as impossible to blend with anyone else. Blair wanted Rose to disappear from the ceremony, without having to say a word. When I guided Rose into the presidential suite, the room listed under my name in the hotel system, she was finally able to sit down. I called the hotel's private medical staff. There was nothing serious medically, but Rose needed clean air and time. I closed the door, drew the curtains, turned off everything with a scent. The room became so quiet I could hear the clock ticking. Rose looked at me, her eyes deeply tired. "Please don't do anything," she said. "I don't want things to get loud." I nodded. I had no intention of making noise. I only planned to close a few doors. I took out my phone. No long explanation. Just one short sentence, calm and steady. Activate the recall process. Now. The voice on the other end didn't ask questions. They knew exactly what that meant. Less than 10 minutes later, my secretary sent an urgent report. I read it line by line, very slowly. Blair wasn't just practical. She was trapped in a web of debt Sterling knew nothing about. Loans with crushing interest. Commitments already past due. This wedding for her wasn't the beginning of love. It was an escape. Sterling in Blair's eyes wasn't a husband. He was a bridge. I sat down and looked out the window. New York was as loud as ever. No one knew that in a high room above the city, a father was reading a report about the collapse of his own family. I could have stopped everything right then. One phone call, and the wedding would be shut down, guests sent home, everything ending quietly. But I thought of Rose. I thought of the trash bin. I thought of the look in Sterling's eyes when he told us to leave. No. Silence now would only allow the lie to continue. I set the phone down and took Rose's hand. She looked at me. She didn't ask anything. Perhaps she had grown used to the way I made decisions long ago. "Tonight," I said slowly, "everything will be revealed. Not to hurt anyone, but to end what began a long time ago." Rose nodded. She closed her eyes, as if preparing for a long night ahead. Outside, the wedding continued. Music played. Guests laughed and talked. No one knew that in just a few hours, the masks would begin to fall. I sat beside Rose for a long time in that quiet room. She had fallen asleep for a while. Her breathing was steadier now, but her hand was still gripping mine, as if letting go might cause everything to slip out of control. I looked at her familiar face. I thought about the years we had walked side by side, and I wondered how many signs I had missed, simply because I trusted silence too much. My phone vibrated softly. Another report. I didn't open it right away. I knew it wouldn't be easy to read, but I also knew that if I didn't read it, no one else would carry this weight for me. When the screen lit up, every detail was painfully clear. Blair's debts were not accidents. They were accumulated deliberately. Each new car, each trip, each luxury item, all carefully recorded. In her plan, the wedding was the moment to close the books. Cash gifts, sponsorships, social commitments, all gathered together to patch a wall, already cracking apart. In every document, Sterling appeared only as a secondary name. He signed without reading. He trusted without asking. And most importantly, he had no idea that everything he proudly showed his friends was standing on borrowed ground. I set the phone down and stepped onto the balcony. The city below shimmered with lights. From this height, everything looked beautiful. But I knew that beauty was only the surface. Just like the bridal lounge earlier, I thought about two choices. One, to shut everything down right now. Two, to let things go all the way to the end of the road they had chosen themselves. Not to humiliate anyone, but to end the deception cleanly. I went back inside and sat beside Rose. She opened her eyes and looked at me. No questions, no blame, just a look. I won't go too far, I said, but I won't let this pass as if nothing happened. Rose nodded slightly. She understood me better than anyone. I began to put things in place. No rush, no noise. I called the hotel management and reconfirmed usage rights for the spaces registered under my company's name. I asked them to keep the wedding schedule unchanged. No changes to lighting, no changes to sound. Everything was to proceed exactly as planned. Then I called the legal team, not to make a scene, only to ensure that when the truth came out, every step stayed within proper boundaries. I didn't want my son's wedding to turn into chaos. I wanted it to become a clear ending. From time to time, my phone vibrated again. Short updates, confirmations completed. I read them, memorized them, then locked the screen. I didn't feel relieved. I just felt the need to finish what had to be done. Elsewhere in the hotel, Sterling was greeting guests. I knew that without being told. He had always been good at that role. Smiling at the right moment, firm handshakes, saying exactly what people wanted to hear. He was enjoying what he believed to be the peak of his life. Blair was too, surrounded by compliments. The wedding dress, the jewelry, the attention. Everything was unfolding exactly as she had imagined. Perhaps in her mind, the trash bin earlier was just a small incident, neatly handled. I checked the time, a little over an hour before the speeches. Enough time for everything to stay on course. Rose was fully awake now. She sat up and fixed her hair. I handed her a glass of water. She sipped slowly, then set it down. "I'm okay now," she said. I nodded. I knew she was pushing herself for me, just as she had done all this time for our son. We changed clothes. Nothing extravagant, just neat and proper. Rose chose a simple dress in a muted color. I wore the suit that had been with me for many years. No one needed to impress anyone. The truth carried enough weight on its own. Before leaving the room, I paused for a moment. I looked around the spacious suite, a place where many of my important decisions had been made. I took a deep breath, not to gather courage, but to remind myself that what I was about to do did not come from anger. We stepped into the hallway. Music from the ballroom drifted toward us, steady and cheerful. Guests were settling into their seats. Everything looked perfectly normal. I took Rose's hand. She squeezed back. No trembling, no hesitation. In that moment, I knew I would not turn back. Not because I wanted anyone to pay a price, but because it was time for people to see what they had chosen to hide. The elevator doors opened. Light from the ballroom spilled inside. I stepped forward slowly. No one noticed us. Not yet. And I knew in just a few minutes that calm would be gone. But this time I was no longer standing outside. We entered the ballroom from the side aisle, where the light was softer and fewer eyes were watching. The music stayed on tempo. Rows of seats were full. Faces waited for a perfect moment. No one turned around to look at us. That felt appropriate. In their world, I was just an old father standing outside the main story. Sterling was on stage. He held the microphone, delivering familiar thanks. His voice was smooth, confident. He spoke about the generosity of the bride's family, about the unconditional support he believed came from others. I stood still and listened to every word. I didn't interrupt. Rose stood beside me, her back straight. She had changed from the simple dress into something refined and modest. Not flashy, but enough for those who knew how to look to sense the difference. As Sterling moved toward the end of his speech, I took one step forward. Just one. The lighting coordinator hesitated. I gave a very slight nod. They understood. The music faded. I walked onto the stage slowly. Sterling turned around, caught off guard. Blair stood beside him, her smile frozen. I took the microphone from Sterling's hand. Not forcefully. Just a firm, deliberate touch. "My name is Arthur," I said evenly. "I am the groom's father." A few murmurs rippled through the room. I didn't pause. I gestured. The large screen behind the stage lit up. The images were clear. No narration needed. The bridal lounge. The trash bin falling. Rose standing frozen. Sterling entering. And the moment he pushed my hand away and told us to leave. No dramatic edits. Just what had happened. The ballroom fell silent. I could hear my own breathing. I looked at Sterling. He couldn't speak. Blair turned about to say something, then stopped when she realized no one was listening anymore. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I'm here to make things clear." I held up a thin folder. I didn't raise it high. I didn't read from it. "This wedding," I said, "has been fully paid for by entities under my management. Not to buy gratitude, but to see how far people would go when they believed no one was watching." A man in a hotel suit stepped out from the side. He bowed deeply. "Chairman Huntington," he said quietly, "everything is ready." I nodded. "Thank you." I turned back to the audience. As the party responsible for the finances, I said, "I am terminating the use of this space for this wedding, effective immediately." No one shouted. No one applauded. Shock spread through the room like a wave. To the guests, I continued, "Please enjoy what has already been prepared. You are not involved in this, but this ceremony, as a family rite, ends here." Sterling stepped forward. "Dad," he said, then stopped when he met my eyes. There was no anger in them, only a distance that had already formed. Blair tried to regain control. She forced a smile, said this was a misunderstanding, that it could be explained. I didn't respond. I simply signaled to the manager. Security staff approached. No pushing. No noise. At the same time, authorized representatives waiting backstage were invited forward. They spoke to Blair in low voices and presented documents. Blair's face went pale. She looked around, searching for support, then realized there was none. Sterling stood there, drained. He looked at me, then at Rose. For the first time that evening, I saw something in his eyes that looked like fear. "Why?" he asked softly. I answered without hesitation. "Because you chose silence when your mother needed your voice." I turned to Rose. She stood upright, calm. No tears, no accusation. Her silence said everything. Those involved were escorted away from the stage area. The ballroom slowly filled with sound again, but it was no longer the same. I set the microphone down. I said nothing more. As we stepped off the stage, a few people bowed their heads to me. I returned a simple nod. Nothing more. In the hallway, I paused briefly. Behind me, I heard Sterling call my name. I didn't turn around. Not because I didn't hear him, but because some answers need time to exist. We left the ballroom. The doors closed. The music was cut completely. In that moment, I didn't feel victory. I felt a clean ending. And for the first time that night, I let out a slow, steady breath. We didn't leave the hotel right away. Rose needed to sit for a while. I took her back to the quiet room from earlier. When the door closed, all the noise outside was left behind. Rose sat in the chair by the window, breathing evenly. She didn't speak for several minutes. Neither did I. Finally, she turned to me. "So, is it over?" she asked very softly. I thought for a moment before answering. "For today," I said yes. "It's over." Rose nodded. There was no relief in her face. only acceptance. I understood. No one hopes their child's wedding ends that way. But sometimes an ending is the only way to keep things from going further wrong. The days that followed moved slowly. Sterling didn't reach out right away. I didn't contact him either. The legal team handled the remaining matters quietly. The wedding expenses were redirected exactly as I had stated. Not as a gift, as a financial obligation. No retaliation, just clarity. Sterling was removed from his position in the group. Not out of personal emotion, but because I couldn't allow someone who couldn't tell right from wrong to represent values built over decades. I signed that decision one quiet morning. No witnesses. My hand didn't shake, but I didn't feel lighter either. Blair disappeared from social circles quickly. What had once been hidden no longer had a reason to stay quiet. I didn't follow it. I didn't take pleasure in it. Other people's lives, once they leave my family, are no longer my concern. Rose recovered slowly. Every morning we walked around the small park near our home. She still avoided crowded places, but her smile returned. One afternoon, sitting on our usual bench, she said, "At least, we don't have to pretend anymore." That sentence stayed with me for a long time. A few weeks later, Sterling came to see me. He stood at the front door, thinner than I remembered. No excuses. No blame. He only said he wanted to talk. I let him in. We sat across from each other, a clear distance between us. Sterling spoke about what he had ignored, about choosing silence to protect his image, about not realizing what he had lost until there was nothing left to lean on. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When he finished, I spoke slowly. I told him that being a father doesn't mean erasing consequences. I said that if he wanted to start again, he would have to begin where there were no lights, no titles. Not in an office, but in places where people learn responsibility from the smallest things. Sterling didn't answer right away. He just nodded. We didn't hug. We didn't make promises. But when he left, I knew the door wasn't completely closed. It just wasn't wide open anymore. A few months later, Rose and I decided to transfer most of what had been recovered into a research fund supporting elderly people with respiratory and environmental health issues. No announcement. No large nameplates. Just a decision recorded with the signatures of two people who had lived through enough noise. One evening, sitting together, Rose asked if I regretted it. I thought for a long time. Then I said I regretted not seeing things sooner. But I didn't regret choosing truth over silence, because silence sometimes isn't kindness. It's avoidance. Now our life is simpler. Fewer parties, fewer social obligations, more quiet mornings. I no longer need to test anyone's character. I only need to know that I'm living by what I once taught my son. Looking back, one thing is clear to me. Status isn't in a dress or a wedding venue. It's in where a person chooses to stand when things stop being beautiful. Money can build grand ballrooms, but it can't repair a fractured character. If you were in my place, what would you do with a child who turned away once? Give them a chance to start again from the very lowest foundation, or close that door forever? I'm still waiting for the answer. Every day. Thank you for staying until the final lines. The message here is simple and clear. Family is not measured by status or money, but by how we treat each other when things go wrong. Silence in the face of wrongdoing is not compassion. True kindness always requires boundaries. Thank you for listening all the way to this moment. Please subscribe, like, and share so more people can hear stories like this. Every interaction you make is what allows honest stories to keep being told.